Avideh, we've been speaking about net zero, how to have what it means to be a zero emissions build. Your intention is to transition it to zero emissions. The house is aptly named ZeroHouz, Houz. What is the significance first of Signal Hill as it relates to your project?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I chose to purchase this almost 100-year-old house because of the history of the city of Signal Hill. City of Signal Hill really came about and became populated during the oil boom of the 1920s. A lot of people moved to Signal Hill because it was one of the largest repository of oil on the West Coast. And so a lot of people moved there to work on the oil fields. And a lot of houses, in fact, my house was one of the houses that was built for these oil workers. So for me, it was really the juxtaposition of creating the cleanest energy, zero emissions house in a city that is still very much reliant on oil. To this day, you see a lot of oil pumps all throughout the city. Some of them are even within walking distance of homes, right in front of homes. And there are new homes being constructed right next to these oil pumps as well. And in fact, my house being about 1,500 feet from an active oil pump. So there is a website. Let me pull it up. It's called the Well Finder Map. So this is a map that is put together by the federal government. And you can go on there and put in the address of your home and see exactly if there are any wells around your home, which one of them are still active, some of them are decommissioned. And so you have this information available to you. And I think that's important to know in terms of health risks and just knowledge.
And one of the other things that's kind of this juxtaposition that you're talking about is that when they were, drilling for oil, that was this transition away from other dirty fuels like coal. And now you're in this position of this transition away from oil as the dirty fuel it is into something much more environmentally and socially just. Inside a house, what things need to be considered for optimal emissions transition? Because I imagine, we talked about some of the things, but I kind of want to reiterate those, especially since, our listeners might be very intrigued and inspired by what you've been saying and be like, okay, I want to target this.
Yeah. So reiterating some of the points that we made, making sure your home's energy efficient, making sure it's insulated and airtight. Those are all great things to do, very low-hanging fruits, and you can find contractors to do these things almost anywhere in the country. Now, specifically for an all-electric retrofit, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. One, if you're in a single-family home, first thing to do is to check your electrical panel. Do you have a 100-amp panel or a 200-amp panel? Most existing homes have a 100-amp panel only. Usually newer homes built in the 2000s and later have 200-amp panels. So if your home has a 100-amp panel and you want to make it all electric or swap out some of the appliances for electric, you have to be very cognizant of how much electricity load you're adding to your panel. It is possible, contrary to what most people believe, it is very possible and legal, at least in California, to electrify a home up to 3,000 square feet on a 100-amp panel. So I can't tell you how many electricians have come out to my house of 500 something square feet and looked at my 100 amp panel and told me, oh, you're going to need to upgrade your panel if you want to be all electric. And if you ask them why, they can't really say why. It's just because it's easier for them to upgrade it and not actually have to think about the loads and do the calculations. But if you're smart, you will do the calculations and you'll see that on a 100 amp panel, there's a lot that you can fit if you're strategic about it, which is what I plan to do with my home. You know, the cost of upgrading an electrical panel can be $5,000 to $10,000. So that in itself is a big savings. Now, another thing to check is your wiring, and you may need to get an electrician to come look at this. But if you have an old home, specifically if you have old, what we call knob and tube wiring, you will have to rewire before you even think about an all electric upgrade. I say this mostly because of your safety, because the knob and tube wiring could catch on fire and could have many other complications. And if you overload it, it's just very risky. So thankfully, my home doesn't have old knob and tube wiring, and it is 100 years old. So I assume there are other homes like mine that don't have it, and you don't need to upgrade your wiring. And that's really it. Again, insulating, air tightness, always important.
And what are some of the things you're doing in your house? I mean, you're changing out the heating, cooling. You're looking at the kitchen, right? You just did landscaping on your house.
Yeah. So the first thing I'm gonna do once the remodel starts, my house is still in permitting. But once I start the remodel, I will be pulling off all the drywall on the inside and gutting the house, which means I'm going to tear everything down to the studs, because I know that there's no insulation in any of my exterior walls. So the first thing I'm going to do is add that insulation and then put everything back together real tightly, make sure it's all airtight, before I do anything else, before I even swap out the appliances and do all of that. So after that, I will do some electrical wiring. I need to run some 240 volt lines for my stove, for example, in my kitchen. So I'll add that, and I'll swap out the kitchen appliances, the stove. I am getting what's called an induction cooktop. Now, if you're like me, I grew up with an old electric stove that my parents had with the coils that heat up and get red when it's hot. And we hated cooking on that thing, but my mom made it work. It wasn't very efficient. Induction cooking is very different. It's not comparable to electric stove cooking at all. Let me tell you that. It is a whole new world of cooking, and it's amazing because it is fast, it is safe. The cooktop doesn't even get hot. So if you have kids around, it is so safe to have it on around kids and be cooking with them. And it's a completely different technology. So it doesn't actually heat up your kitchen. So if you're tired of your kitchen getting heated up and you're cooking a big meal, guess what? You're not gonna have that problem with induction. So it's very important for me to get an induction cooktop in the house. I'm gonna get a smaller one because everything's tiny in my house. But those induction cooktops are readily available. And I am also going to change out the water heater. I have an old gas water heater that is about 19 years old. I don't know how it's still functioning, but it is. And I'm going to replace that with what's called a heat pump water heater. This is different than an electric water heater. So be careful when you look at water heaters. An electric water heater will use a lot of energy, but a heat pump water heater uses the air, the warm air around it to heat your water. So it's actually more efficient, it uses less electricity. So I will be replacing mine with a heat pump water heater. And then my HVAC system, I will be replacing with a heat pump HVAC. Again, heat pumps are the way to go if you're going use electricity, it can get very expensive, and that's I still come across a lot of people saying, oh, but it's going to cost a lot to run these appliances and everything on electricity. Well, not if you have a heat pump HVAC and a heat pump water heater, then it's very efficient.
What are some of the realistic challenges and barriers that you've run into? You were talking about permitting. We talked about contractors not kind of knowing all the details.
Yeah, one of the interesting challenges I came across when I was trying to find appliances, especially the induction cooktop, was that I would walk into appliance stores and they would have all sorts of different stoves on display, all gas stoves. And if I asked them for an induction stove to just see it and see what it looks like and what it feels like, they would scratch their heads and say, well, we don't have one on display, but you can order it and then see for yourself. So that was a tiny challenge. I mean, I'm pretty set on an induction cooktop, so no problem. I'll get it and I'm sure I'll be fine with it. But I think for most homeowners out there, you want to see it. You want to see how it looks with your other appliances. You want to see how big it is, what color it is, blah, all those things that we all care about. So it is really important to get more of these induction cooktops and stoves on displays in appliance stores. One store where I did find a surprising amount of induction cooktops on display was, guess which store? It was
Where?
IKEA.
Oh, wow. I'm actually not surprised.
Yeah. So IKEA actually has 4 or 5 of these induction cooktops on display. And it's a great way to see what it looks like. And then they've got them, they're very affordable. They've got really good prices on them. So that was one of the challenges. Another challenge is, of course, finding the right contractors that know how to do this, especially with the electrical work. They scratch their head and they say, no, you can't do this. You got to do X, Y, and Z. No, but I can. The code allows it. So knowing the code helps. I have a bit of an advantage here. And another challenge, I'm forgetting, it just escaped my head. I was going to talk about it. Was the supply chain disruption that we experienced with COVID. Everything, all appliances, building materials is back ordered. We're still struggling with the effects of COVID and the fact that a bunch of people were not working and manufacturing for a while, for a year or so. So things are back ordered still, and it takes a long time.
Well, I have a few more questions before we end this portion of the show, but also a reminder to all of our listeners, there's always an extended version that you can access at our Patreon account for EcoJustice Radio. Real briefly, because we have like 5 minutes before the end of the show, and I want to get more information for people, like where they can find you and that sort of thing. But what are your thoughts on offsetting our environmental footprint by purchasing carbon credits? And in that, what are carbon credits for those that may not know?
So, tough question. Carbon credits are essentially a way to offset your carbon footprint. So let's say you take an airplane flight somewhere. That airplane uses fossil fuels to run, and that airplane is going to release emissions into the atmosphere. Some of that is going to be attributed to your ticket and your flight. So that's your carbon footprint with that flight. And nowadays you can pay a couple of dollars to offset, quote unquote, offset your emissions. So what does this mean? It means that you're essentially paying for some form of renewable energy generation somewhere else. So you're canceling out your emissions with the generation of clean renewable energy somewhere else. Now, this is all, it makes us all feel all nice and fuzzy on the inside when you think, oh, I just offset my emissions, yay. But really, it's not that effective, right? Because oftentimes the emissions that are offset, they're offset in another state or even in another country. So you're not really offsetting your emissions where you're at. It's removed from you geographically, and it's not going to have the same impact. So offsetting emissions generally I would say is a little bit of greenwashing. There is some merit to it, but it's probably the least credible way of being environmentally sustainable and reducing your carbon footprint. The best way is to just reduce the source of your carbon footprint and the emissions that are released as a result of your daily activities or living or whatever, is to just reduce that to begin with.
Yeah, because with the carbon credit, the emission's still being made. People are still
Yeah.
being affected. Air is still negatively affected and breathed in and causes health problems. Where can people find more information about you, follow your journey, and the journey of the ZeroHouz?
They can follow me on my website is www.zerohouz.com, and that's spelled ZeroHouz. I'm also documenting this process of the retrofit with the house on Instagram. So if you're on Instagram, follow me on @zero.houz, HOUZ. And also I'm posting on Facebook, same handle on Facebook @zero.houz. I have a Facebook page there. You can reach me there. Please reach out with any questions you have. I'm happy to answer your questions and put them up as a video or a reel or anything on Instagram. I am here to spread the knowledge and what I'm learning as I'm going through this process myself.
And are there any additional resources that you want to recommend our listeners to check out?
Yeah, there is the Clean Energy Coalition website that also has a repository of contractors and resources. I mentioned the Switch is on website already. I also want to mention Redwood Energy. Redwood Energy is a private consulting company in California. They are the largest net zero energy residential designers, and they have a lot of great resources. So one thing I really want to point the audience to is Redwood Energy has produced a pocket guide to all electric retrofit of single family homes. This is a PDF document you can download. And honestly, it's the best thing. It just has step-by-step instructions. It has all the options laid out of what things you should consider. What are your options out there? It was just released last year, so it's very up to date and new in terms of all the information in there.
Well, Avideh, it's been amazing to have you on the show. I just want to remind our audience, we're going to continue this conversation. So visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to hear the extended version or to find how you can get that extended version. Avideh, thank you so much. Stay with us. We're going to continue the conversation, but thank you for joining us for our podcast and radio version of the show.
Thank you, Jessica. It was a pleasure.